Hello, my name is Jake White, and today in this video I'm going to be going over the basics of our autonomic nervous system in relation to stress and trauma. So we're going to go over the different components of our nervous system and look at the relationship they have with one another, and then actually highlight what happens when we go through an event that's traumatic and an event that actually brings a lot of overwhelm into our nervous system, and looking at how we start to respond in that moment for survival. I think when we're looking at those heightened states that we go into based on survival, we're actually looking at how we start to shut down, how we start to contain all of that energy that is mobilized in those events, and then through that shutdown, how we actually eliminate ourselves from actually processing that event. And so what that means is that we carry our stress, we carry that mobilizing huge energy within our body, we carry the emotions, the physiological responses, the memories of those events within our nervous system, because we're still continuing to protect ourselves. When we look at the nervous system, we actually learn why it is we do that and how we preserve ourselves in those moments where we are experiencing trauma, but that after that trauma, that response that we've created of self-preservation actually eliminates a lot of our ability to connect with our environment. It's actually that we tend to live within a protective response based on what has happened, rather than being able to live in a more safe and engaged response to our environment. So I hope this video will clear some of that up for you and show you why this happens, why we start to disconnect and freeze within ourselves, why we feel disconnected from our environment, and also giving you some helpful ways to start to release some of that stress. I think a lot of times when we're looking at our nervous system and releasing stress, we need to know actually and be able to navigate our body and our physiological responses to even know what it is we're supposed to be connecting with. To really look at, okay, what am I reacting to right now? How am I feeling this? And then to be able to be with that and process it in a really safe, gradual way. And I think that in a lot of ways, working with our nervous system and developing somatic approaches to ourself is actually a very enlightening process. It gives us a lot more access to our energy within our body. It helps us to navigate through the nuances of our experience, and it allows us to be continually processing what is happening in our body, rather than actually shutting down and freezing and kind of leaving those experiences untapped and unprocessed within our experience. So to demonstrate the basics of our nervous system, I'm going to use a slinky. And what I'm going to start out with is our parasympathetic nervous system. So our parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest part of our nervous system. What it is responsible for is actually slowing ourselves down. So what our parasympathetic would look like if we demonstrate it with this slinky is just a natural up and down movement. So when you wake up in the morning and when you engage with your kids or you eat breakfast, you're operating at this normal rest and digest. There's nothing in your environment that is necessarily stressing you out, and you're able to really engage with your loved ones, and everything kind of feels safe. So some things to look at within this parasympathetic nervous system, and when I say things to look at, I mean things for you to observe. So when we're developing this relationship with our nervous system, we actually want to take time to notice these aspects of our experience, because noticing these aspects of our experience actually encourages them, and it gives us more access to them. And our parasympathetic nervous system is something that we want a lot of access to. What I said before is that it's in relationship to safety in our environment. So we want a lot of access to the feelings the physiological responses, the memories that we've had in our life that are safe because they trigger this part of our nervous system. Okay, so some things to notice is resting heart rate, a even and kind of peaceful emotional state, also a really natural breath. So you can see how I'm kind of expanding and contracting this slinky. So that's supposed to represent those really natural rhythms of our body. So a natural resting breath. Another thing to notice is actually social engagement. So part of our parasympathetic nervous system is our social engagement system. So what that means is that it's actually the use of our throat to vocalize, to speak about what it is we want, what it is we need. Okay, so that's a part of our parasympathetic nervous system. Also, being able to listen to others engages our parasympathetic nervous system. All of the different expressions of our emotional states on our face. So when we smile or we see someone else smiling, basically that triggers our parasympathetic nervous system and helps us to create emotional connection with other human beings. Basically through social engagement and a sense of safety and acceptance in our environment, we actually reform more slower and more gradual rhythms of our body that stimulate, one, our immune system, again, our natural breath, natural flow of our blood through our body, and stimulates healing and digestion, okay? So when we have an experience that is threatening, what we start to do is we go into a sympathetic response. So a sympathetic response is our fight or flight. Now, what we were talking about before is that we're going to look at the relationship between these different parts of our nervous system. So our parasympathetic has a relationship to our sympathetic nervous system. So when we go into a stress response, what that looks like in our slinky is more of this mobilizing energy. And what that does is it actually pushes all of those rest and digest aspects of our nervous system to the side as non-essential, okay? So it's not essential to be socially engaging with people when we are in a real threatening situation. All of our energy goes through keeping ourselves safe. Also, a resting heart rate would not be essential because the blood would not pump to our extremities to protect ourselves. Also, digestion, it's not going to be good in a moment where we are threatened to actually be eating and digesting our food. So again, everything in our parasympathetic gets put to the side as non-essential. So you can see that when we stay at a state of stress in our life, if we stay at fight or flight, we lose access to rest and digest, okay? So something to look at when you start to go into a sympathetic response and when you start to feel this in your body, what you may notice is that you start to actually, your pupils start to dilate. You start to really focus on the thing that is causing you threat, okay? Or maybe you become really vigilant, so you're looking around, you know, what is causing this? What is causing my stress right now? A lot of times what people feel is clamminess in your hands, so sweating, closing of your chest, your stomach starts to feel really tight, and then also sometimes people feel shaking or tension in their hands or their arms or their legs. Okay, so that's an example of that sympathetic starting to galvanize all its energy as the energy moves away from parasympathetic into sympathetic. Or what you might be feeling when you're shaking is actually that sympathetic energy starting to discharge from your nervous system, okay? So what happens when we start to mobilize and we don't get out of this situation, so we don't protect ourselves. Something that is really common that I hear a lot in private practice is maybe when I was a child, there was a lot of violence or threat in my environment, and no one ever stopped to connect with me. No one ever picked me up, held me, let me know that it was okay. So that stress was kind of pervasive in my environment. Nothing ever changed. I think that's a really good category of looking at when our environment doesn't change and we stay locked in this big sympathetic energy and we're not able to protect ourselves, that what we start to do is actually go into a freeze response. And what this is called is a dorsal vagal freeze. Okay, freeze is a part of our parasympathetic nervous system. Basically, what is happening here is that I'm starting to shut down from my environment. I'm not engaging with my environment anymore. And also, I'm starting to disconnect from all of this huge energy that is overwhelmed within my nervous system. What we commonly refer to this is as disassociation. I'm disassociating from my experience. And this is actually a biological response of safety in extreme events where my life is being threatened. Okay, so if I'm being repeatedly exposed to harm, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shut down and freeze. And what ends up happening is that maybe the person or the situation will change. And then what I start to do is I start to come back and start to feel my body re-energize. And then I can get away from that event. And then I will start to actually be able to engage again and feel safe again within my body, okay? Some examples of freeze would be you see a deer in headlights, that's that freeze response. A more extreme example would be like an opossum where they actually fall over and they play dead. That's a dorsal-vagal freeze response, and it's a part of our autonomic nervous system. So again, there's relationship here. Okay, so our freeze response has a relationship with our sympathetic nervous system. So when we freeze, what we're actually doing is we're actually suppressing all of that mobilizing sympathetic energy within our body. Okay, and what that means is that we are never actually get the chance to protect ourselves. So later on in our life, what starts to happen is that we start to become triggered in our environment by things that start to bring up the relationship with this mobilizing energy that's being stored within our nervous system as a memory within our body. So what that means is that when we are triggered, it's bringing up this held sympathetic energy that was not able to fulfill itself within our nervous system. Now, something that I commonly talk with clients and help them understand is that this is held in our body in a lot of different ways. That it can be held as a image, a memory of the event that happened. It can be held as an emotion that we feel in our body. So it might be held as anger or frustration. It might be held as sadness or disappointment or withdrawal. It can be held in our nervous system as postures that we go into. So I might have something happen in my environment now that reflects something that's happened to me in my past, and I might feel my head start to drop and I might start to shut down. Another thing is it actually may have a relationship with my complexion, the exposure of my feelings into my body. So I might feel flushed in my throat, or I might feel my head become really, really flushed with energy. I become, red, or I might feel really tense and balled up in my hands. In the beginning of the video, what I talked about is that we want to start to form relationship with this stress. So there's ways that we can start to access some of this mobilizing energy and to be able to actually notice it and hold it within our body and connect with it. So ultimately, what we're trying to do by understanding what is bringing up our stress and how that feels in our body is that what we want to do is tie that back into our feelings and sensations within our body. So the natural way that all animals, wild animals, and us as humans releases this type of stress is that we do it through little and small physiological shifts within our nervous system. Okay, so maybe in relation to a memory that I'm having, I may notice a sense of shaking in my body. And that's an example of one little release that I'm able to be present for within my experience. Also, maybe within an emotion that I'm feeling right now in my life, I might feel a little bit of that as a tension in my chest or a tear that comes down my face. One thing that you may notice as I describe this is that we're talking about very little things that I can notice, that I can tie back into sensation within my body. Just to give another example is I may notice that my posture changes in relation to something that is happening, and actually I can be present for that and just feel my head turning down. Okay, or maybe I may notice that in the moment I'm starting to tell the story of what has happened currently, and I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed within my body, and I can start to be in present and notice some of the sensation in relation to that story that I'm telling. Okay, so something that I just highlighted there is that slowing things down, being able to be present for little parts of our experience. And this is so key when we're working with our nervous system, is that we want to start to be able to relate to our body and to our experience in really slow, gradual ways. Okay, and the reason why this is true is because when we're dealing with sympathetic response, we're looking at really huge energy that is being mobilized to protect us, okay? And that energy is really big, and if we start to actually be present for it and contacting our body, we can be re-exposed to all of the relationship with that event in our physiological response. So what's going to happen is that we're going to continue to overwhelm our nervous system and recreate the patterns in the physiological response of trauma within our nervous system. And this is something I really wanted to highlight in this video, is that learning how to slow down and connect with little parts of our experience. In somatic experiencing, we call this titration. We're titrating our experience. Titration is a word that's borrowed from chemistry, and it means one drop at a time. So when you mix chemicals, you don't mix the whole chemical with another. You don't dump everything into each other because you might get an explosion. So what you do is you do it one drop at a time. And what happens when you do one drop at a time is you may see a little fizzle, okay, in the beaker, but there's not that huge explosion. So what we want to do when we're dealing with trauma, or when we're triggered in our environment currently, is we want to start to be able to relate to our feelings in a slow, gradual way. Okay, so being able to notice sensation of tingling, shaking, noticing those posture changes, noticing emotion and being able to tie it to the feeling in our body. And so what that does is, as we go one drop at a time, as we notice one sensation at a time, what starts to happen is we start to bring those parts of our experience back into relationship. And so what we're doing is we're actually letting go of that freeze and disconnected response. We're starting to engage in our sympathetic nervous system in a slow way. And what that does is it actually begins to re-engage our parasympathetic nervous system. So again, we're looking at that relationship with these aspects of our nervous system. And so what happens is that as we're with some of that sympathetic energy in our body and we slow it down and have a gradual process, what we actually start to feel is more access to our parasympathetic nervous system again, because our parasympathetic is meant to slow our sympathetic nervous system down. Okay, so what we may notice is after an expression of an emotion or after a shaking, we may notice a deep breath or a sense of warmth start to come over our body. And what that is an example of is that engagement with our parasympathetic nervous system. And so if we keep doing that and we keep noticing our nervous system, noticing our body and tracking our sensation, what we start to do is we start to let go of these stresses and these tensions in our body. And what we begin to do is have more access to parasympathetic, more access to safety in our environment, more access to social engagement without the fear of being exposed to overwhelm and fear and traumatic events within our environment. Okay, so things that I would like to highlight from this video is notice the relationship, where you are in space and time, and what part of your nervous system you're in. Remember to start to slow down and access some of these sympathetic responses that you feel in your body and start to become present for them, especially in those moments where there is stress within your environment. Okay, and another thing to do is to start to see, as you process slowly some of those physiological responses within your body, how do you notice yourself starting to re-engage? How do you notice yourself starting to feel safer or more whole or more relaxed within your body? Okay, and that's how we create this slow process of letting go, releasing stress, letting go of stress, and re-engaging with our environment. And that's how we begin to let go of trauma from our past and start to create a brighter present and future for ourselves. So thank you for watching this video. If you did like the video, please like it, and also subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be offering these educational videos whenever I can, as much as I can. So thank you so much for being a part of this and watching the video. Okay, bye.